Okay, so we are now down to the last 4 fields in this portion of the app. So these right here, which include the editable gemstone size, editable diamond total carat weight, fields for overall earring, necklace, pendant, ring dimensions, and finally additional item details. Now, I'm kind of covering these all at once because they have some similarities between the 4 questions that you can answer. Let's go look at those at GoCanvas right now. So all of these have in common the fact that they are important information to gather and input when it's available, but they're not always going to be available in every item. So, and I'm sure you just saw on the spreadsheet, there's a lot of notes about each category. So we'll go through examples for each of these. You'll also notice that unlike in the above questions where we had a drop-down menu where we could select options and then it would fill the editable field where we could edit it, this doesn't have, these two right here don't have drop-down menus where we can select options. And that's because the options are so varied and differ so much from case to case that it would be impossible to create one. Well, I say that, but actually, as we just discussed, this is a drop-down that will autofill those fields, but we're going to be ignoring that for now because that's going to require some special training. So you'll input any details that you have of this nature in these fields. And then I've got these checked right now, but these 2 fields down here, these are check boxes that you only check if you have information to put in these fields. And once you check them, then you can put in your notes. Additionally, you'll notice that this says include field for overall pendant dimensions, length times width. That doesn't mean that that question's only for pendant. It's pulling that based off of what the item type is. So if we changed it to earrings and we went down there, it would ask you to include the field for overall earring dimensions, length or width, or both. And if we went to bracelets though, let's see, you'll notice that that field goes away. The reason that field goes away is because bracelets dimensions we already cover in the sizing and also in the width of here. So basically, you'll only have this field about inputting overall dimensions on some of the jewelry types where that information is common or relevant, and sometimes you won't have it at all. So in cases where that's not asked, you don't even need to look for that information. Okay, so that's kind of just a general overview. Let's start talking about what each category is looking for. So let's talk about gemstone size. So not all items are going to have gemstone size information. However, if an item does have that information, it's going to be in either the listing description or you can find it in the item's name. It's important that we record the gemstone size whenever it's available because David Yurman pieces, if they have gemstones, are often valued and classified by the size of the gemstones they have. He typically puts it right in the name of his items. So whenever we have information about gemstone size, we want to record it in GoCanvas. Now, typically you're only going to be worried about the gemstone size on David Yurman rings, earrings, pendants, and necklaces with pendants. And that's assuming that those necklaces, earrings, and rings have a gemstone to begin with. If you're dealing with one of those types of items and you see a millimeter measurement in the listing description or the item name, then that is typically going to be referring, in almost all cases, to the gemstone size. If you remember, we discussed this briefly when we were talking about item width being found in item names in listing descriptions for bracelets, chains, and chokers. We talked about how if an item has a millimeter measurement in the name or the listing description and the item is a choker, chain, or bracelet, then typically that millimeter measurement is going to refer to width. If you're still having difficulty understanding when a millimeter measurement in either the item's name or the listing description details is applied to either the width or the gemstone size, then I think this flowchart can help you. It says at the top, if there's a millimeter measurement in the item's name or listing description details, and then if we follow the left branch, it says, and the item is a pendant, ring, or earrings, or necklace with a pendant, same thing as a pendant, then the millimeter measurement refers to gemstone size. And just to remind you, the gemstone size is going to be the measurement of the gemstone from one side to the other, just like you see these red arrows here. and it would look like this. So you have David Yurman 11 millimeter Albion Prasiolite and diamond pendant. However, if you have a millimeter measurement in the item's name or listing description details, and the item is a choker, chain, or bracelet, then that millimeter measurement refers to cable width. And here are examples of how we measure cable width, what we're talking about. We're actually measuring the distance between that cable from one side to the other where those red lines are. So that's another way to distinguish between the two. Now let's take a look at an example. So this item is a Poshmark item, and this is a screenshot of the listing descriptions page taken on a desktop instead of a mobile view. So you can see here that there's literally almost no information under the listing description. All it says is excellent condition. However, if you go up and look at the item's name, it says David Yurman 11 millimeter Albion ring hematite, size 7. So right there, we've got a millimeter measurement, and we can see that this is a ring with a gemstone. And so we know right away that that's not going to be a width or anything else. That's going to refer to the gemstone size. And so that's what we would input into the gemstone size field. So let's look at another example. This is a Noblesse pendant listed on eBay. And here is this necklace's listing description screenshot. Now, if you read through this, you'll see there's a couple of different millimeter measurements, and that's why I wanted us to look at it. But it very clearly says that it has a faceted black onyx, and that it says 12 by 10 millimeters, and that is the gemstone size right there. However, if you read the very next line, it has a pendant, and then it says 16 to 14 millimeters. So this is an important example because we also will ask you in one of the very next questions to identify any additional dimensions for pendants, earrings, rings, and necklaces with pendants. And this is what we're talking about. So that basically wraps up the information for editable gemstone size. Let's now look at editable diamond total carat weight. So information about the total carat weight of diamonds on a given piece is going to be found exclusively in the listing description. Making sure that you identify diamond total carat weight is fairly straightforward. So we'll look at a few notes on how to find and input the diamond carat weight, and then we'll also look at one example. So there's only a couple of notes about this field, but they are very, very important. The first one was just a note to be aware that sometimes if you're looking for diamond total carat weight, you're not going to see the word diamond at all. It'll just be abbreviated as TCW, so be on the lookout for that. Also, it's very, very important that when you input the total carat weight information into the GoCanvas listing, that you format the information exactly as follows, and it gives you an example up here in this screenshot. You're going to do an open parentheses, you're going to write out the word diamond, and then TCW equals, and then you're going to input the amount of the carats, and then write the word carats out, close parentheses, and then you're done. The reason it's important to format this field exactly as we have specified here is that this is actually going to plug into the description that's generated from the inputs we put into this form. So we need it in exactly that format. Now let's do an example. Let's say that the listing description says that TCW equals 0.5. So this is an example where we don't have diamonds mentioned at all, but we can see the abbreviation for total carat weight is there. So then you would input that exactly as follows on the screen. Open parentheses, diamond, TCW equals, and then it said 0.5 carats, so you'd input 0.5, then the word carats and close parentheses. Let's look at this example now of an actual listing description and go through how we would input that into GoCanvas. So if you look at this listing description, you can see about 2/3 of the way down, it gives you the total carat weight as 0.43. Right, and now let's put that in the GoCanvas form. When we go into GoCanvas, we would go to this field right here, do our open parentheses, and then we're going to do a close parentheses. And that's how you would format that. Okay, let's move on to the next field. Okay, so our next field is asking us to whether or not we want to include overall item dimensions for items that are either earrings, necklaces, pendants, or rings. And you'll actually be pulling the information for the item dimensions directly from the listing description. So let's look at GoCanvas. So when you look at the dimensions field, you can see that it's a checkbox initially before we filled anything out that says asks us to check it if we want to include a field for overall earring dimension. Once we check the checkbox, this blank field opens up, and then we can record the item's dimensions right there. Now, this field will only be an option available to complete for specific items, specifically rings, earrings, pendants, and necklaces with pendants. And that's true because people like to know the overall size of the pendant they're buying and the overall size of the earrings they're buying in terms of length versus width. If you're entering a type of jewelry where this field isn't an option, then this is not information you need to worry about entering. But for the other items that don't have this field, that's because typically this information, length or width, is reported earlier on in other parts of the form. In summary, if you're completing a form where this checkbox is visible and you see any information about length or width or any other dimensions that have not been reported elsewhere on the form on the listing description, then you input it in here. If not, then you don't have to worry about it. So let's read through the notes about this field, and then we'll actually look at some examples. So now you want to always include any information about dimensions that's in the listing description in this field. So if you have any information at all about dimensions in the listing description that you've not included elsewhere in the form, then you will definitely want to put it in this field. And when this field isn't available, for example, if you're dealing with a choker or watch or a chain, if for some reason there's some listing dimensions or some item dimensions in the listing description, for example, if it has the watch face measurements or something like that, then since you don't have this field available, you would put that information into additional details, which we'll cover next. It really doesn't matter how you input it because we're going to go through it and change it if we need to. I'll read you the examples. I won't really go through how to input it because most of the time it's just a copy and paste job. So example 1, the listing description says these earrings measure 1.4 inches in length and 0.25 inches in width. So that would definitely go into the item dimensions field. Listing description 2. The ring's gemstone is 11 millimeters wide, and its size, including the diamonds surrounding the gemstone, is 14 millimeters. So this is kind of an interesting one because you would have put 11 millimeters wide under the gemstone size, but you would want to put the 14 millimeters under the ring's dimensions. So what you put into the field would be something like rings dimensions, 14 millimeters. And then if you wanted to just be complete, you could put around, including the diamonds around the gemstone, just for extra explanation. Listing description, example 3, the pendant measures 20 by 20 millimeters, excluding the bail. So in that case, you're talking about the pendant measurement. They actually specify that. So you would just take that entire sentence if you wanted and copy and paste it into listing descriptions. And I say down here too, when in doubt, just copy and paste over the entire section of information in question from the description, and Ronnie and I will format it when we review it because we really do want to have more info rather than less info to this field. Okay, so let's take a look now at the very last field on this section of the app, which is additional item details. So these are basically going to be any details that are specific in the listing description, non-generic details that may be of value later on that have not been reported anywhere else. I've given you a plethora of examples for this because it could be all over the place, honestly. This you'll find like exclusively in the listing description. And I think probably the best way to show you what all it's going to entail is to just take you through the examples. By the way, this is also a field in GoCanvas that is a checkbox field. So once you click that checkbox that you've got additional item details to input, it'll open up a field where you can type in those additional details. So yeah, and I say here, you'll include any other information provided that is specific and noteworthy about the piece which has not been included in a prior field. Things that would qualify would include information such as retail price, past damage that's been repaired, comments about the history or the condition of the piece. Anything that falls in that category are always great to include here. And even if it's not like something that's a positive characteristic of it, putting it in this field allows Ronnie and I, when the item comes in and we're doing arriving shipments workflow for the piece, to make sure that we pay attention to anything like that that we may need to note and possibly return it for. So here are some examples. Only worn 6 times since purchased. We know that's true if that's written by the original seller, then we can go ahead and put that with honesty in our listing description. So that's a good one to include. Okay, so the next one says no longer have original earring backs. So this would be like if you had a set of earrings and the backs were lost, which is important to women because the backs also have the DY hallmark on them. Putting no longer have original earring backs in there is important for Ronnie and I to see, and also important for our customers to know so that they don't expect that. Originally purchased at Neiman Marcus 2 years ago. That's that statement about the condition or history of the piece, that if it's a specific detail that would not be true of all items in this category, it's valuable for us to have because we can put that in as a selling statement for our customers so that they know where it was purchased, and it was purchased only 2 years ago. Rare, this collection has been discontinued by David Yurman. Also another great one to entice our buyers. So any information of that nature that's in the listing description, you can put in this field. It'll take time to really be able to understand how to identify these things. So it's, we don't expect that to be something that is developed right away, but just have a general idea in the back of your mind what would go in there. And when in doubt about whether to include information here, include it. And Ronnie and I will edit it and provide feedback and refine what information should be included when we review the item. And the only other thing I was going to say is that if you have item dimensions, but it's for a choker, chain, or bracelet, and it's not included elsewhere, you would put that in additional item details because the additional item dimensions field is not going to be available to input that in for those types of items. It's only opens when you're dealing with rings, necklaces, and earrings. Okay, so we are finally through that page. That's by far the most intensive portion of the form. And next we'll start on the very last page, the last couple of fields, to finish out inventory purchases.